The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the defendant, Marcus Williams, stood silently before the judge. His hands were clasped tightly in front of him, his jaw clenched in quiet frustration. The judge, a middle-aged man named Harold Jensen, glanced at the defense table with visible disdain. Marcus was dressed in an ill-fitting suit that seemed to highlight the disparity between his station and those who typically graced the legal world. "You must be Marcus Williams," Judge Jensen said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "The so-called top lawyer from some no-name firm. I hope you're prepared for this trial, because from where I'm sitting, it's not looking good for you." Marcus didn't flinch. He had been through worse. But the judge's words stung nonetheless. The courtroom had already been set up to underestimate him. The young black man from a working-class neighborhood, a place where expectations were always set low for someone like him. As the proceedings unfolded, the judge continued to undermine Marcus at every turn. There was no effort to conceal his bias. Every question Marcus asked was met with a curt dismissal, every argument he presented cut short. At one point, the prosecutor, an eager young woman named Jessica Collins, caught the judge's eye, and he gave a subtle nod. She leaned in, whispering something about Marcus's background that set the judge's smirk firmly in place. The courtroom was a battlefield, and Marcus felt the weight of every eye upon him, watching, waiting for him to make a mistake. But he knew the truth. He knew the law, not just because he had studied it, but because it was his weapon against a system designed to exclude him. He had been underestimated his whole life, and now, here he was, fighting in the highest courtrooms, representing people who needed him. But none of that mattered in this room, where his worth was measured by the color of his skin and not the depth of his legal expertise. "Mr. Williams," Judge Jensen sneered, "you do realize that you're wasting the court's time, don't you? Perhaps you should consider leaving the courtroom to the professionals." Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. His hands, still clasped in front of him, were the only thing keeping his fury at bay. He had spent years earning the title of top lawyer in the country, and yet here he was, treated like an incompetent fool because of the color of his skin. Suddenly, there was a pause in the proceedings. The door to the courtroom opened with a soft creak, drawing everyone's attention. A man walked in, his steps confident, and his presence commanding. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, and as he walked past the row of spectators, the room fell into a stunned silence. Marcus's heart skipped a beat as the man made his way to the front, his gaze meeting Marcus's for a brief moment. "Your Honor," the man said, his voice steady and calm, "I'm afraid I must interrupt the proceedings." Judge Jensen, who had been mocking Marcus just moments before, stood abruptly, his face pale. What is this? Who are you?" The man, now standing at the front of the courtroom, glanced briefly at Marcus, then fixed his gaze firmly on the judge. "I am Marcus Williams's senior partner. I am the one who built the firm he works for, the firm that has won landmark cases in civil rights, corporate law, and public policy. I am the one who trained him, and I can assure you, Your Honor, he is no less qualified than any lawyer you've ever had in your courtroom." The courtroom was eerily quiet. The judge, who had been sneering moments ago, was now scrambling for words. His face turned a shade of red that matched the injustice he had just inflicted. "Wait a minute." The judge stammered, looking at Marcus, then back at the man standing beside him. "But, you're not." His words trailed off, the realization dawning upon him. Marcus's senior partner, Jonathan Morgan, continued. "Marcus Williams is not just a no-name lawyer. He's one of the most brilliant legal minds in this country. His reputation precedes him. The only reason you don't know that is because you've let your bias cloud your judgment." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The judge's face twitched with a mix of embarrassment and fury. He was caught in the very lie he had believed for so long, the lie that a man like Marcus couldn't possibly belong in the upper echelons of the legal world. But the damage was already done. The court had seen the truth, and the walls of bias that had once seemed impenetrable were starting to crack. The prosecutor, Jessica Collins, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The once arrogant confidence she had projected earlier was now replaced with uncertainty. The courtroom was no longer the same. There was a shift in the air, a change in the balance of power. For the first time, it wasn't Marcus who was the underdog, it was the system. The judge, now visibly rattled, tried to regain control of the room. I apologize for my earlier remarks, Mr. Williams, he stammered. But we must move forward with the case. But Marcus, his confidence bolstered by the revelation of his true status, was no longer interested in apologies. His voice, when he finally spoke, was steady and commanding. Your Honor, I don't need your apology. What I need is for you to recognize that I have earned my place in this courtroom. Not because of where I come from, but because of what I know, and what I am capable of. The judge opened his mouth to respond, but there were no more words. The truth was undeniable. Marcus Williams was not just a defendant. He was the embodiment of resilience, of justice in the face of bias, and the very thing the legal system had been built to overlook. The trial continued, but the judge and the prosecutor both knew they had already lost. When the final verdict was rendered, it wasn't just the case that was resolved, it was a larger, more important victory. Marcus Williams had shattered the assumptions that had been placed on him, and with it, he had shattered the walls of injustice. As Marcus left the courtroom that day, the weight of his past no longer seemed so heavy. He had fought back, not just for himself, but for every person who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or oppressed. And with each step he took, he knew that the journey to justice was far from over. But for the first time, he felt the power of truth at his back, and the belief that it could topple even the highest walls. As Marcus stepped out of the courtroom, the bright sunlight hit his face, momentarily blinding him. The air felt different now, charged with a new energy. The tension that had gripped him all through the trial seemed to dissipate with every step he took away from the courthouse. His heart still beat heavily, but now it was with the rhythm of victory, not fear. The weight of the injustice he had suffered over the years was beginning to feel lighter, as though the scales were finally tipping in his favor. Jonathan Morgan, his senior partner, walked beside him, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Marcus could feel the pride radiating off Jonathan, but there was something deeper in his eyes. A recognition of just how much this moment meant, not only for Marcus but for the legal profession itself. Jonathan had seen many lawyers rise to prominence, but he had never witnessed a battle quite like this one. Marcus was no longer just a lawyer, he had become a symbol of resilience. That was something else, Marcus, Jonathan said, his voice low but filled with admiration. I've seen you in action, but this, today was different. Marcus nodded, but there was no smile on his face. I just wanted them to see me for who I am, he said softly. Not for where I come from, not for what they expect me to be. I want people to know that the law belongs to everyone, regardless of their background. Jonathan placed a hand on his shoulder. And you've shown them that, my friend. Not just in the courtroom, but in the way you carry yourself every day. As they reached the steps of the courthouse, a group of reporters descended upon them, microphones in hand. It was a small moment of chaos, but Marcus had been through worse. He had faced larger crowds, more intense scrutiny, but never before had he felt so ready for it. One of the reporters, a young woman with a notebook in hand, approached him first. Mr. Williams, could you tell us how it feels to be the defendant in a case where you were so unfairly treated? And how do you feel about Judge Jensen's remarks today? Marcus took a deep breath, his gaze steady as he looked at the reporter. The truth is, I've heard those kinds of remarks my entire life. People assuming I don't belong. That's the reality for a lot of people who look like me. But today, I was able to stand up for myself, not just as a defendant, but as a lawyer who has earned his place in this world. I'm not here because of luck. I'm here because of hard work, and I'm proud of it. The reporter scribbled down his words, but Marcus wasn't done. He turned to face the gathered crowd of journalists. What happened today wasn't just about me. It was about the system that continues to dismiss people based on their appearance, their race, their background. Today, I proved that the law isn't just for the privileged few. It's for everyone, and I'll keep fighting until that truth is accepted everywhere. Jonathan watched as Marcus spoke, his words echoing in the stillness of the crowd. For a moment, there was no noise, no flashing cameras, just the sheer power of his words filling the air. It was as if the entire world had paused to listen. The reporters began firing questions, each one more urgent than the last. But Marcus wasn't intimidated. He was in control now. He had been underestimated before, but not anymore. He knew who he was, and more importantly, he knew what he could do. The system may have tried to break him, but Marcus Williams had come through stronger than ever. As the questions faded into the background, Marcus felt a familiar presence beside him. It was the young assistant he'd mentored, Jordan, who had been in the courtroom the entire time, sitting quietly in the back, taking notes. "You were amazing in there," Jordan said, his voice full of admiration. "I've never seen anyone stand up like that." It was like watching a legend in the making. Marcus smiled at him, his heart swelling with a quiet pride. "You've got the potential to do the same one day, Jordan. You've got to believe that the world can be different. It's all about showing up, speaking your truth, and never backing down." Later that evening, as Marcus sat alone in his apartment, he reflected on the events of the day. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. He had won this battle, but there were more battles to come. Every victory was a small step toward dismantling the structures that had held people like him back for so long. But today, he had made a statement, not just to the people in that courtroom, but to the world. The system had been shaken, and he had played a part in it. He closed his eyes, letting the quiet of the night settle over him. The sound of the city outside his window was constant, a reminder that the world kept moving, whether or not people were ready to change. Marcus knew there would be more challenges ahead, but he was ready for them. He had always been ready. The next day, his phone buzzed with calls from clients, colleagues, and the media. The word had spread. Marcus Williams had become a name that no one could ignore. But what mattered most to him was not the recognition, not the praise, but the realization that the world was starting to see him for who he truly was, not as a black man in a suit, but as a top lawyer who had fought and won, not just for his own future, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Marcus stood in front of his mirror, straightening his tie, preparing for another day in the courtroom. This time, though, he wasn't just a lawyer, he was a force to be reckoned with, and no one would ever forget it. The journey had just begun. As Marcus prepared for his next case, he couldn't shake the feeling that the battle ahead would be even more challenging than the one he'd just won. The media attention had already begun to pour in, and though he appreciated the support, it came with its own set of pressures. Every move he made was now being scrutinized, and every word he spoke seemed to carry a heavier weight. Despite the mounting attention, Marcus remained focused. He had learned to block out distractions over the years, to keep his eyes firmly on the goal. He had been fighting for equality, for justice, long before this trial had begun, and he wouldn't let a moment of recognition divert him from that path. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, strategy meetings, and press interviews. Each conversation seemed to reiterate the same narrative. Marcus Williams had become a symbol of what was possible when someone who had been oppressed finally fought back. But Marcus knew the truth, this wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had been told that they were less than, that they didn't have the right to hold positions of power or success. One afternoon, he received a call that would change everything. It was from the highest court in the country, an invitation to speak at a national legal summit on diversity and inclusion. The very thought of addressing such a prestigious audience both terrified and excited him. He was being invited not just as a lawyer, but as a representative of change. This was the kind of platform he had always dreamed of. One where he could make a difference beyond the courtroom, one where his words could reach thousands and influence the future of the legal system. But as he hung up the phone, the weight of the moment hit him. Marcus wasn't just going to speak about diversity, he was going to have to live it. Every person in that room would be looking to him for answers, for inspiration, for proof that change was possible. And Marcus didn't take that responsibility lightly. He knew that speaking from the heart was important, but he also knew that he needed to back up his words with real, tangible change. The days leading up to the summit were a whirlwind of preparation. Marcus spent countless hours researching, writing, and reflecting on his journey. He spoke to mentors, colleagues, and even some of the clients he had helped over the years. Their stories fueled him, reminding him of why he was doing this in the first place. It wasn't about the accolades or the recognition, it was about making sure the legal profession was a place where people like him, people of all backgrounds, could thrive. The day of the summit arrived, and Marcus stood backstage, waiting for his turn to speak. His heart was racing, but his mind was clear. He knew this moment could shape the future of countless individuals who had been shut out of opportunities simply because of who they were. This wasn't just his fight. It was a fight for everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough. When his name was called, Marcus walked out onto the stage with a calm confidence. The room was filled with influential lawyers, judges, and lawmakers, all of them eager to hear his message. As he looked out into the sea of faces, Marcus felt the weight of history pressing down on him. He had never been one for grand speeches, but today was different. Today, he wasn't just speaking to an audience, he was speaking to the future. He began slowly, his voice steady but full of emotion. I stand before you today, not as a man who has risen above the odds, but as a man who has been shaped by those odds, he began. I've spent my life fighting for a place in a world that told me I didn't belong. And I know I'm not the only one. For too long, people who look like me have been denied the same opportunities as others. But I am here to tell you that those barriers don't define us. We define ourselves. He paused, letting his words sink in. The room was silent, every eye focused on him. My journey wasn't easy. It wasn't handed to me, Marcus continued. But it also wasn't mine alone. It was the work of every person who believed in me, who saw my potential when others couldn't. And that's what we need in the legal profession, people who will look beyond the surface, beyond the stereotypes, and see the potential in everyone, regardless of their race, background, or station in life. Marcus could feel the room shift. The energy had changed, as if the audience had collectively shifted its focus. They were no longer just listening, they were hearing him. I stand here today, not just as a lawyer, but as a testament to what is possible when the system works for everyone. I've made it to this point, but there are so many more who need to follow. And it's our job to make sure that the doors we've walked through stay open for them. We can't just talk about diversity. We have to live it, every day, in every case, in every courtroom. His voice grew stronger, more resolute. We are the change we seek. If we don't take responsibility for creating a system that's just for all people, we're doing a disservice to the very principles we claim to uphold. We are the stewards of justice, and justice belongs to everyone. As he finished, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't the kind of applause he had expected, loud and drawn out. But instead, it was quiet, almost reverent. It was as though the audience understood the weight of what he had said, and the responsibility that came with it. Later that evening, as Marcus sat alone in his hotel room, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. The summit had been a success, but it was just the beginning. He knew that the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges. But for the first time in his life, he felt truly seen. He wasn't just the black lawyer in a courtroom. He was the person who had the power to change the future. With a deep breath, Marcus stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city lights below. There was so much more to be done, so many more battles to fight. But in that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt before, hope. Real hope, that things could change, not just for him, but for everyone who came after him. The fight was far from over, but now, Marcus knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. At the forefront of a movement, not just for diversity in the legal profession, but for equality and justice in every part of society. And with that, he made a vow to himself: he would continue to speak up, fight back, and ensure that justice was something everyone could hold. The weeks that followed the summit were a whirlwind of opportunities. The media coverage from Marcus's speech had been widespread, and his name was now synonymous with justice and reform. The legal community, once hesitant to acknowledge him as an equal, was now looking to him for leadership. Clients sought him out not just for his legal prowess but for his voice on matters of equality and social change. Marcus had become a symbol of hope, a beacon for those who had long been excluded from the system. Despite the whirlwind, Marcus remained grounded. He knew that the spotlight was fleeting. What mattered most was the work that still lay ahead. His firm had grown in reputation, but there was a deeper, more personal commitment within him now. He wasn't fighting for accolades, he was fighting for something far more profound: the chance for others to have the same opportunities he had fought so hard to claim. One morning, as he walked into the courthouse for another high-profile case, he was met by an unexpected face. It was Judge Harold Jensen. The very same judge who had belittled him months ago during his trial. Marcus paused, unsure of how to respond. Jensen stood there, his face slightly reddened, hands clasped in front of him. "Mr. Williams," the judge said, his voice steady but with an underlying trace of remorse. "I wanted to apologize for my behavior during your trial. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I have come to understand how wrong I was." Marcus stood still for a moment, weighing his options. He could walk away, hold on to the anger and resentment that had fueled him in the past. Or he could accept the apology, recognizing that change, even in small doses, was still change. After a brief silence, Marcus spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I appreciate your apology, Judge. But it's not enough to apologize. What matters is what we do from here. We can't just admit our mistakes, we have to fix the system that allowed them in the first place." Jensen nodded solemnly. "I'm committed to doing that. I've already started taking courses on unconscious bias and diversity in the legal field. I won't be the judge I was before. I promise you that." Marcus didn't smile, but he felt something within him shift. He could see the sincerity in Jensen's eyes. Perhaps this was the first step toward real reform, not just in the courts, but in the hearts and minds of those who wielded power. As Marcus entered the courtroom for his case, he was filled with a quiet confidence. The fight for justice had no clear end, no single victory that would mark the battle won. But each moment of progress, each small act of change, was a step in the right direction. That afternoon, as the judge called the courtroom to order, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. From the underdog in a courtroom full of bias to now, standing at the helm of a movement for change, he had come further than he ever imagined. But what was most important was that his work wasn't done. He knew that every case he took, every person he helped, was part of the larger struggle to make the legal system just for all. The courtroom was filled with the usual sounds, the shuffle of papers, the low murmur of conversations. But for Marcus, there was a new sound, a sound of hope. The hope that, just as he had fought his way into this space, others could do the same. That the system could evolve. And that one day, perhaps, his story would no longer be an anomaly, but a new standard of what was possible. The judge looked at him and nodded, signaling for him to present his case. With steady hands, Marcus stood and walked to the front of the room, ready to fight, ready to speak for those who couldn't, ready to continue the fight for justice. This was just one more chapter in a story that was far from finished. And as he looked around the courtroom, Marcus knew that the battle was worth it, not for him, but for all those who had yet to find their voice, all those who had been silenced by a system built to exclude them. For them, Marcus Williams would continue to fight, every day, for as long as it took. The journey was far from over, but in that moment, Marcus felt the power of progress, a power that had been long denied to so many. And for the first time in his life, he felt that the road ahead was not just a path of personal achievement, but of collective transformation. As the gavel came down, Marcus knew that this fight, this life, was his calling. And it would never stop until justice was truly for all.